Back with you tonight. Thanks for staying on. Justice Minister Ronald Lamola has granted Transnet approval for security to get peace officer status. This will give security officers the power to effect arrest for cable theft. For more on this, we're joined now by United National Transport Union General Secretary Cobus van Vuuren. Cobus, good evening. Good to have you with us tonight here on In Focus. How significant is this move by the minister to grant approval for Transnet security officers to get this peace officer status?
Good evening, Tabu. It is a significant move, but granting the security officers peacemaking or peacemaker powers and powers to arrest is, however, not sufficient to resolve the problem.
How deep is the problem? What has been seen so far? I mean, there are reports, for example, that the number of incidences that were seen previously due to the security intervention that was put in place saw a little bit of a reduction. Of course, things have now been affected by the price of fuel, where you are seeing a rise in a number of incidences. In fact, a loss of volumes there, around 30 million litres is what is being cited. What has changed?
So, Tabu, we need to differentiate between the rails and then the pipelines. So on the fuel side, there is a significant product loss, runs into the billions. And the same applies on the rails. As a result of all the cable theft and infrastructure vandalism and sabotage, Transnet, the rails, TFR and all the other rails are very badly influenced as well.
Yeah. So besides the fact that the peace officer would have the ability to complete a docket, which many are saying is key, you're saying a whole lot more needs to happen. Are you talking here in terms of resources, capacitating those Transnet security officers?
Absolutely. Tabu, I mean, we're looking at thousands and thousands of kilometers of infrastructure. Having 5,000 peacemaker people that can do the arrests is definitely not enough. We need to look at it from a macro environment. So there's issues of vandalism and taking the current economic status into consideration of the country, the high unemployment. Of course, there's vandalism. People see an easy way and they vandalize the infrastructure and then they sell the metal and they sell the copper. But it goes much bigger than that. It's almost like, and we need to consider the fact that we should not throw away the fact that the infrastructure holistically is actually sabotage. It is not just purely vandalism. By
that, you mean that we then need to maybe also interrogate a little bit deeper the political motivation, shall I say, for the vandalism that we're seeing?
Absolutely, absolutely. The longer the rail infrastructure is not completely 100% functional, there is benefits. Even if you look at the process side, the longer the passenger rail agency is not able to function 100%, there is factions that do profit from it. And it's the same on the rail. If you look at the infrastructure and the fact that it cannot function 100%, of course, there's also factions that benefit from that.
Yeah.
And Ubuntu is very adamant about the fact that much more has to get done, not just to safeguard the infrastructure, because the infrastructure is almost the core of the economy. So from the coast down to Gauteng and all over the country, I mean, things needs to get transported. And if we don't have 100% effective rail infrastructure, Transnet's not going to get out of the hole that they're in, and neither is the problem going to go away.
Are you saying then the perpetrators of sabotage are allowed to get away with it? In other words, would something like imposing harsher penalties to those who damage infrastructure be a strong enough deterrent for those who would be offenders? Or what is it that you think would make it more difficult for offenders to get away with it?
So if you look at the recent publications, the first offense offenders will get a 3-year jail sentence. But we need to look at this, like I said, from a macro perspective. In 3 years, they go out, there's still no jobs, and people will go back to what they were doing. They need to get money, they need to get food. So the government maybe needs to start looking at this as not just purely a social problem, but a political problem, and sufficient resources needs to be put into this to prevent it. We have got a defense force that is not very active. There's no conflict. So there is bodies and stuff that can be utilized and deployed to safeguard the rails and the infrastructure.
Yeah. Now, Transnet has previously, for example, made suggestions around using technology, for example, being deployed to protect the infrastructure, as opposed to, of course, getting just men on the ground to cover that kilometer of infrastructure. Has enough been done around that, or do you believe that in itself also would not be sufficient?
So when you look at this problem, it has to be a holistic approach. You need the manpower, but you also need to apply technology. It doesn't help you've got technology that can view and watch the rails from the sky, eye in the sky, but you don't have sufficient feet to respond to threats when they arise and when threats are identified on the infrastructure. So much more must be done, technologically and with resources in the form of human resources. And further to that, you can even go as far as saying that the peacemakers, it doesn't help that you've got the ability to make arrests, but the people that come and damage the infrastructure and sabotage and vandalize the infrastructure is organized. They come with AK-47s, they come 4 or 5 at a time, and if you're not properly armed and you don't have a proper support structure, all is in vain.
Now, if, again, the South African National Defence Force cannot step in here because of its own challenges in terms of the number of officers that they've got in the military, I'm not talking here management and those people in administration, but actual officers who would be on the ground, what other option is there for Transnet?
It's a very big dilemma, because Transnet, if you look at them financially, from a financial perspective, although they've shown a profit, it is a theoretical profit. So it's as a result of rebalancing of the balance sheet and reevaluating properties. So when you look at the amount of resources, and I'm talking monetary-wise, that we require as a country to safeguard the infrastructure, we're talking about astronomical amounts. Further to that, the fact that the government is not providing bailouts in the form of what they've provided for SAA and Denel and all of those, Transnet is in a very difficult situation. They don't have the resources to protect the infrastructure, and they don't have the infrastructure to make sure the country is economically viable and the rails are economically viable. So it's an evil circle that just goes round and round and round. So somewhere the resources has to come from, and it's maybe time for government to step in and provide bailouts in the form of what they've provided for SAA and Denel.
And you believe that would be put to better use, for example, if the security function is insourced as opposed to maybe it being outsourced? Where does the union sit on that one?
So the question around insourcing and outsourcing is a very political item. So we believe that insourcing or outsourcing, let's call it outsourcing, utilizing labor rogues and stuff is not necessarily beneficial. But ensuring that people that is insourced and deployed as security and peace officers within Transnet will of course enjoy the same benefits as the rest of the employees. But there's pros and cons to each one of these. So there's insource and outsource, and each one of them has got pros and cons. We firmly believe that insourcing is the right way to go, because that creates job security. We all know what happens to contractors and functions that is outsourced. It's not ideal, and there's recent legislation that makes it very difficult, or more difficult, to keep these outsourced functions. They're still alive and they're still well, but we believe that insourcing is the right thing to do.
And to that point, there are other issues, of course, that come to play, which you've already mentioned, for example, around the theft of copper and it being sold elsewhere. There's, of course, legislation that is being tightened, for example. Others are calling for a break or a moratorium or a banning of selling of scrap metal. Would interventions of that nature certainly help to reduce the kind of destruction that you're seeing to critical infrastructure at Transnet?
Absolutely, especially for certain materials like copper. We know that copper is being stolen across the country, and a lot of these syndicates that does this vandalism and stealing of the copper and other precious materials, or more precious materials. All of this goes to the export market. It goes to, or some of it goes to the export market. It gets exported, reworked, and then imported back into South Africa, and we pay crazy prices for stuff that's been stolen from South Africa.
Cobus van Vuuren, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. He is with the United National Transport Union. He's the General Secretary there, Cobus van Vuuren.